The morning mist rolled across the Montana wilderness, painting the landscape in ethereal shades of gray and gold. Marcus "Ghost" Thompson stood on his weathered deck, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee as he surveyed the untamed beauty of his 200-acre ranch. To his neighbors in the small town of Pine Valley, he was just another retired veteran seeking solitude in the mountains. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But beneath his quiet demeanor lay the heart of an elite warrior, a decorated Navy SEAL whose skills would soon be put to the ultimate test. The ranch had been Marcus's sanctuary for the past 5 years, a place where the echoes of combat missions and the weight of his military service could fade into the rhythmic sounds of nature. The cool mountain air filled his lungs as he watched the sun peek over the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the fields where his horses grazed peacefully. His German shepherd, Shadow, lay at his feet, ever vigilant despite the tranquil morning, his dark coat gleaming in the early light. At 58, Marcus had settled into a routine that brought him peace. Each dawn began with a 5-mile run through the property, followed by tending to his small herd of horses and maintaining the ranch's infrastructure. The physical labor helped quiet the memories of his 23 years in the Navy SEALs, where he'd earned his nickname, Ghost, for his ability to appear and disappear like a phantom during critical missions. Those memories, though carefully tucked away, had shaped every aspect of his current life. From the way he positioned his bedroom windows for optimal sightlines, to his habit of always having 3 alternate escape routes planned. The locals knew him as the helpful neighbor who fixed fences, aided in search and rescue operations during harsh winters, and occasionally shared stories at the Pine Valley Diner. Few knew of his distinguished military career, and that's exactly how Marcus preferred it. His closest friend in town was Sheriff Kate Martinez, who respected his privacy while appreciating having someone with his experience in her jurisdiction. Over the years, she'd occasionally sought his advice on search and rescue operations, knowing his tactical experience could mean the difference between life and death in the unforgiving Montana wilderness. Marcus walked down the steps of his deck, his boots crunching on the gravel path that led to the stables. The morning dew sparkled on the tall grass, and the distant sound of his horse's nickering brought a smile to his weathered face. This was what he'd dreamed of during those long nights in combat zones, a piece of land to call his own, where the only decisions he had to make involved which fields to hay and when to repair the old barn's roof. The property had become more than just a retirement project. It was his redemption, a place where he could finally lay down the burden of his past missions. The ranch house itself was a testament to his handiwork. Built in the 1940s, Marcus had spent 2 years renovating it himself, replacing rotted wood, modernizing the electrical system, and adding solar panels for self-sufficiency. The property's remote location, nestled against the Bitterroot Mountains, offered both isolation and strategic advantages he'd recognized from his military training, though he'd never imagined he'd need to think in those terms again. Every improvement he'd made to the property had been done with meticulous attention to detail, a habit ingrained from his years of mission planning, where overlooking the smallest detail could mean the difference between success and failure. Shadow suddenly perked up, ears forward, as the sound of a vehicle approaching echoed through the valley. Marcus recognized the familiar rumble of Sheriff Martinez's patrol truck making its way up the winding dirt road to his property. Weekly visits from Kate had become part of his routine, usually involving coffee and updates on local happenings. But today, something felt different. Shadow's posture remained rigid, his usual friendly demeanor replaced with an alertness that made Marcus's combat-honed instincts stir. As the patrol truck came into view, Marcus noticed Kate's usually relaxed expression was replaced with concern. She pulled up to the house faster than usual, gravel spraying as she braked to a stop. 20 years of combat experience told Marcus that his peaceful existence was about to be disrupted. His hand unconsciously moved to his hip, where he'd once carried his sidearm, a gesture that hadn't surfaced in years but felt as natural as breathing. "Marcus!" Kate called out as she stepped from her vehicle, her voice carrying the weight of serious news. "We need to talk. There's something you should know about what's been happening in the valley." Marcus's jaw tightened as he read the tension. In Kate's body language, 5 years of peace had been good, but he'd always known it might be temporary. Whatever was coming, the warrior in him, the part he'd tried to leave behind, was already awakening, preparing for whatever storm was brewing on the horizon. The ranch hadn't just been his escape, it had become his home, his purpose, and his new mission. As Kate approached with her troubling news, Marcus felt the familiar clarity of mind that had served him through countless operations settling in. Whatever was threatening his peace, he would face it with the same determination and skill that had kept him alive through 2 decades of the world's most dangerous missions. The morning's tranquility was about to shatter, and deep down, a part of him he thought he'd buried was ready to embrace the chaos. Marcus gestured for Kate to follow him inside the ranch house, Shadow trailing behind them with measured steps. The interior was a reflection of its owner, practical, organized, and meticulously maintained. Military precision was evident in every corner, from the perfectly arranged furniture to the subtle security measures hidden in plain sight. As Kate settled into a chair at the kitchen table, Marcus poured her a cup of coffee, his movements deliberate and controlled. The morning light filtered through bulletproof windows, an upgrade Marcus had installed not out of paranoia, but from years of experience knowing that preparation often meant the difference between life and death. The walls held few decorations, save for a shadow box displaying his Navy SEAL trident and a photograph of his former team, SEAL Team 3, taken in an undisclosed location after a particularly challenging mission. "Before you tell me what's wrong," Marcus said, sitting across from Kate, "let me show you something." He reached beneath the table and pressed a hidden latch, revealing a concealed compartment. Inside lay a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to my father, also a veteran. He taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by the battles he wins, but by what he chooses to protect." Marcus opened the journal, revealing entries dating back to the Vietnam War. His father, James Thompson, had served as a Marine Corps scout sniper and, like his son, had sought peace in these same mountains after his service. "My father bought this land with his service. Pei built this house with his own hands. He taught me everything I know about ranching, about living off the grid, about finding purpose after war." The memories flooded back as Marcus ran his fingers over his father's handwriting. He remembered the day he'd announced his decision to join the Navy SEALs, his father's proud but worried expression, the long talk they'd had about the weight of carrying such responsibility. "Dad passed away while I was deployed," Marcus continued, his voice steady but touched with sadness. "I was in Afghanistan, leading a classified operation, couldn't even make it back for the funeral." Kate listened silently, understanding the significance of Marcus sharing this part of his history. In the 5 years she'd known him, he'd rarely spoken about his past. "After that last deployment, I knew it was time to come home," Marcus explained. 23 years of service, 15 as a team leader. I'd seen enough combat, lost enough friends. This ranch became my way of honoring both my father's memory and my own need for redemption. The ranch represented more than just property to Marcus. Every acre held significance. The north pasture where he'd learned to ride horses with his father, the old oak tree where they'd spent countless hours discussing life's deeper meanings, the creek where he'd first learned to track wildlife. These were the values his father had instilled in him, the same values that had guided him through his military career. "During my time with the SEALs," Marcus continued, pulling out a worn photograph from the journal, "I served in some of the world's most dangerous places. Iraq, Afghanistan, places I can't even name. Led teams into situations most people couldn't imagine. But through it all, I held on to what my father taught me about integrity, about protecting those who can't protect themselves." The photograph showed a younger Marcus with his father, both in their respective military uniforms. James Thompson's Marine dress blues contrasted with Marcus's Navy working uniform, but their proud, determined expressions were identical. He always said that a warrior's greatest strength isn't in his ability to fight, but in his wisdom to know when to fight and what to fight for. Kate noticed how Marcus's demeanor shifted as he shared these memories. The quiet rancher she knew transformed subtly, revealing glimpses of the elite operator he'd once been. His eyes scanned the room periodically, a habit formed from years of maintaining situational awareness in hostile environments. Even in his own home, these instincts never fully disappeared. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This ranch isn't just land, Marcus said, closing the journal carefully. It's a legacy. My father built it as a haven for our family, a place where the burdens of service could be set aside. I've maintained it, improved it, made it my own, but its purpose remains the same, a sanctuary for those who've carried the weight of protecting others. Shadow patted over and rested his head on Marcus's knee, sensing the emotion in his master's voice. The dog had been more than just a companion. He was a link to Marcus's military past, trained by the same handlers who'd prepared canines for SEAL teams. Even Shadow here represents a connection to that life, Marcus explained, scratching behind the dog's ears. He reminds me daily that vigilance and loyalty never retire. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the windows, Marcus straightened in his chair, his expression becoming more focused. "So, Kate," he said, his voice taking on the calm, measured tone of a man accustomed to handling crises. "Tell me what's happening in the valley that's got you concerned. Whatever it is, it won't be the first storm these mountains have weathered." Kate's fingers tightened around her coffee mug as she began to share the troubling news. "It started about 3 weeks ago," she said, her voice carrying the weight of growing concern. "Small things at first: vandalized mailboxes along the valley roads, stolen equipment from the Petersons' farm, cattle breaking free from seemingly secure pens. Nobody thought much of it initially." Marcus listened intently, his expression neutral, but his mind already cataloging the pattern. Shadow remained alert at his feet, sensing the tension in the room. The morning sun now streamed fully through the windows, but the warmth didn't reach the cold feeling settling in Marcus's gut. "Then things escalated," Kate continued, pulling out her notebook. "The Hendersons' barn was broken into last week. All their farming equipment was destroyed. Not stolen, Marcus, destroyed. Somebody took the time to systematically wreck every piece of machinery they owned. The damage was calculated, precise. This wasn't random vandalism." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're thinking organized crime," he stated rather than asked. His years of experience had taught him to read between the lines, to see the bigger picture behind seemingly disconnected events. Kate nodded grimly. "We found traces of activity along the old logging roads, fresh tire tracks, makeshift camps, signs of heavy vehicle movement. At first we thought it might be illegal logging operations, but it's more than that. Yesterday we intercepted a drug shipment at the county line. The suspects were carrying Mexican cartel IDs." The mention of cartels caused Marcus to lean forward slightly, his combat-trained mind already running through scenarios. He'd dealt with cartel operations during his SEAL days, particularly in joint operations along the border. They were known for their brutal efficiency and complete disregard for civilian casualties. "The cartel's moving into the valley," Kate explained, spreading out several photographs on the table. They showed various scenes of destruction: burned fences, damaged equipment, spray-painted threats on barn walls. They're systematically targeting ranches and farms, creating chaos, making people feel unsafe. Classic intimidation tactics. Marcus studied the photos with a professional eye, noting details others might miss: boot prints that indicated military training, tool marks that suggested professional equipment, timing patterns that pointed to careful planning. "They're setting up a new smuggling route," he concluded. The valley's remote location, the network of old logging roads, the sparse population, it's ideal for their operations. Kate nodded. "That's our assessment too. But here's what really concerns me, Marcus. Yesterday, I caught one of their scouts photographing your ranch. They're mapping the valley, and your property sits at a crucial junction. The old mining road that runs through your land connects to 3 different county highways." The tactical significance wasn't lost on Marcus. His ranch's location, which he'd chosen for its isolation and defensive advantages, would be equally valuable to anyone wanting to control movement through the valley. He stood and walked to the window, scanning the tree line with newly alert eyes. "There's more," Kate said, her voice dropping. "We've identified their leader, Manuel El Coyote Ramirez. He's got a reputation for making examples of anyone who stands in his way. 4 ranchers in Arizona were killed last year when they refused to let his operation use their land. The cartel made it look like accidents." Marcus absorbed this information silently, his mind already shifting into operational planning mode. The peaceful morning had evaporated, replaced by a familiar tension he hadn't felt since his active duty days. Small details he'd dismissed over the past week suddenly took on new significance. The distant sound of vehicles late at night, shadows, increased alertness during their perimeter walks, the cut fence he discovered and attributed to wildlife. "They've been testing our responses," Marcus said, thinking aloud. "The vandalism, the theft, they're gauging how we react, identifying weak points." He turned back to Kate. "Have you noticed any drones, small aircraft activity?" Kate's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, actually. Residents reported unauthorized drone flights last week. How did you know?" "Standard cartel's recon tactics," Marcus explained. "They've evolved their methods. They use drones for surveillance, mapping potential routes, identifying security measures." He paused, remembering similar patterns from his military operations. "They're preparing for something big." Shadow suddenly stood, ears forward, staring intently toward the window. A moment later, the distant sound of an approaching vehicle reached them, not the familiar rumble of local trucks, but the high-performance purr of expensive engines. Marcus moved to the window with practiced stealth, staying clear of direct sight lines. 3 black SUVs were making their way up the Valley Road, their tinted windows and new conditions standing out starkly against the rural backdrop. "Looks like we're about to meet the welcome wagon," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who had faced countless dangerous situations. "Kate, I want you to leave through the back. Take the old fire road. It'll keep you out of sight." "Marcus, you can't face them alone," Kate protested, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. "I'm not going to engage," Marcus assured her, though they both heard the unspoken yet in his voice. "But we need to know what we're dealing with. Sometimes the best way to understand your enemy is to let them show their hand." As Kate reluctantly headed for the back door, Marcus watched the approaching vehicles with the calculated focus of a predator assessing its territory. The peaceful retirement he'd built was about to be tested, and the warrior he'd tried to leave behind was awakening, ready to protect everything he'd fought to preserve. The black SUVs pulled up to Marcus's ranch with calculated precision, their engines purring to a stop in a formation that spoke of military training. Through the kitchen window, Marcus observed 6 men emerging from the vehicles, their movements fluid and coordinated, wearing expensive casual clothing that couldn't quite hide their tactical postures. Their leader, a tall man in his 40s with a jagged scar across his left cheek, surveyed the property with the cold calculation of a predator. Shadow remained silent beside Marcus, trained to maintain stealth when his master was in observation mode. Marcus recognized the telltale signs of professional gunmen, the slight bulges under their jackets, the way they unconsciously maintained spacing between each other, the practiced scanning of sightlines. These weren't common criminals, they were trained killers trying to pass as businessmen. "Buenos dias," the scarred man called out, his voice carrying an artificial warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Is anyone home? We're here to speak with the owner of this beautiful ranch." Marcus stepped onto his front porch, maintaining a relaxed posture while positioning himself with clear access to the concealed shotgun mounted beneath the porch swing. Shadow followed, staying close but invisible from the front. "That would be me," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone unimpressed by intimidation tactics. The scarred man smiled, revealing a gold-capped tooth. "Ah, excellent. I am Diego Vasquez, representing Mountain Valley Development Corporation. We're interested in discussing a business opportunity with you." He started to approach the porch, but stopped when Shadow emerged, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Beautiful dog," Diego commented, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon before catching himself. German. Shepherd? Military trained, I assume? Marcus nodded slightly, noting how the other men had subtly repositioned themselves for better firing angles. Former service dog, he replied. Still keeps old habits. Now, what kind of business brings a development corporation up my road in vehicles better suited for a military convoy? Diego's smile tightened fractionally. Ah, you have a good eye, senor. These roads can be treacherous. We believe in being well-equipped. As for our business... He pulled out a leather folder, holding it up like a peace offering. We represent certain investors interested in establishing transportation, infrastructure through this valley. Your property, particularly the old mining road, is of special interest to us. Transportation infrastructure, Marcus repeated, letting a hint of skepticism color his voice. Must be some valuable cargo to need escorts carrying Mexican-made Mendoza firearms. He saw the subtle shock register in Diego's eyes at his identification of their concealed weapons. Those aren't exactly standard issue for real estate developers. The artificial warmth in Diego's expression vanished, replaced by something harder, more authentic. You have an interesting background, senor. Thompson, Marcus supplied. Marcus Thompson, former rancher, current rancher. Nothing interesting about that. Diego's scarred face twisted into a knowing smirk. Let's not play games, Mr. Thompson. We know exactly who you are. Ghost. 23 years Navy SEALs, specialized in counter-cartel operations. Your reputation in certain circles is... impressive. The other men shifted their stances, hands moving closer to their weapons. Marcus remained perfectly still, his mind calculating distances, angles, and response times, a habit that had kept him alive through countless confrontations. Then you know I'm retired, Marcus replied calmly. Just wanting to live quietly on my ranch. Not interested in any new business ventures. Diego spread his hands in a gesture of false regret. Unfortunately, Mr. Thompson, this isn't a venture you can decline. The mining road will be used. The only question is whether you'll benefit from cooperating or... He paused, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. Suffer from refusing. That sounds an awful lot like a threat, Mr. Vasquez, Marcus observed, his voice carrying the same deadly calm that had made hardened terrorists reconsider their life choices. Simply business reality, Diego replied. We're offering fair compensation. $5 million for unrestricted access to the mining road. Consider it an early retirement bonus. Marcus allowed himself a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm already retired, and I know what happens to the land once your transportation infrastructure is established. The answer is no. Diego's face hardened. You should reconsider, Mr. Thompson. We're not like the local troublemakers you're used to dealing with. El Coyote doesn't take no for an answer. Things tend to happen to people who refuse his generous offers. Tragic accidents, mysterious fires. It would be a shame if something happened to this beautiful ranch. Funny thing about SEALs, Marcus responded, his voice carrying an edge that made even the hardened gunman tense up. We're trained to handle threats from land, air, and sea. Maybe you should consider that before making veiled threats about accidents and fires. Diego stared at Marcus for a long moment, the tension crackling between them. Finally, he tucked the folder back into his jacket. We'll give you 24 hours to reconsider, Mr. Thompson. For your sake, I hope you make the wise choice. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and do say hello to Sheriff Martinez for me. I believe I saw her vehicle leaving by your back road earlier. As the SUVs pulled away, Marcus watched them until they disappeared around the bend. Shadows. Growl finally subsided, but both man and dog maintained their vigilant posture. The morning's peaceful atmosphere had been shattered, replaced by the familiar tension that preceded combat. The cartel had shown their hand, and Marcus knew that the next 24 hours would determine whether his ranch became a battlefield or a graveyard. Inside the ranch house, Marcus moved with practiced efficiency, securing the property's surveillance system he'd installed years ago but rarely needed to use. The monitors showed the black SUVs heading back down the valley road, kicking up dust in their wake. He picked up his satellite phone, a secure line he'd maintained since his SEAL days, and dialed Kate's number. They're gone, he said when she answered. But they'll be back. El Coyote's men aren't known for taking rejection well. He paused, reviewing the conversation in his mind. They knew about you leaving through the back road. They've been watching longer than we thought. I'm calling in additional patrols, Kate responded, her voice tight with concern. Marcus, these aren't just regular cartel soldiers. Their leader, Diego Vasquez, we've got a file on him. Former Mexican Special Forces, turned mercenary, now El Coyote's top enforcer. He's suspected in at least 30 deaths across 3 states. Marcus absorbed this information, his tactical mind already formulating strategies. They offered me $5 million for the mining road, he said, moving to check his security cameras. That's cartel money. They're planning something big. The road must be crucial to their operation. He heard Kate shuffling papers on her end. The mining road. Marcus, it makes sense. That old road connects to a network of abandoned mining tunnels. They could move product through the mountains without hitting any checkpoints. Your ranch is the key to their whole operation. Shadow's alert bark drew Marcus's attention to one of the security monitors. A drone was hovering at the edge of his property, just beyond rifle range. They're already starting surveillance, he noted grimly. 24 hours. That's what they gave me to reconsider. I can have state police here by tomorrow, Kate offered, but they both knew it wouldn't be enough. No, Marcus replied, watching the drone's movement patterns. That's what they expect. They've dealt with law enforcement before. This needs to be handled differently. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Kate, I need you to do something for me. Check on my neighbors, the Hendersons, Old Man Parker, the Williams family. Make sure they're safe. I have a feeling the cartel might try to send me a message through them. As if confirming his suspicions, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the valley. Marcus moved to his western window, spotting smoke rising from the direction of the Hendersons' property. It's starting, he said quietly. Multiple reports coming in, Kate confirmed, her voice shifting to professional urgency. 3 fires set at different ranches. No casualties, but the message is clear. They're showing what they can do. Marcus's jaw tightened. The cartel was escalating faster than expected, trying to force his hand. They were demonstrating their reach, their capability to strike multiple targets simultaneously. It was a tactic he'd seen before in his SEAL operations. Create chaos, spread fear, then offer protection for compliance. I'm going to check the Henderson place, Marcus said, already moving to his gun safe. They're closest, and Sarah Henderson is home alone with their kids while Tom's in town. He quickly entered the combination, revealing an organized arsenal, remnants of his military career that he'd hoped never to need again. Marcus, wait for backup, Kate urged. This could be a trap. That's exactly what it is, he agreed, selecting a concealed carry pistol in his old tactical vest. But if I don't respond, they'll think they can pick us off one by one. Sometimes, the best way to spring a trap is to walk into it knowingly. He could practically hear Kate's frustration through the phone. At least let me send deputies to secure the perimeter. No, Marcus insisted, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. Keep your people visible in town. Let the cartel see. Think their intimidation tactics are working. That law enforcement is pulling back to protect the population center. It'll make them overconfident. Shadow was already by the door, combat harness secured, ready for action. The German Shepherd had been through countless training scenarios with Marcus, and now those skills would be put to real use. Give me 2 hours, Marcus continued, securing his communications equipment. If you don't hear from me by then, implement Emergency Protocol Delta. Delta was their predetermined crisis response plan, developed months ago during one of their conversations about worst-case scenarios. Be careful, Marcus, Kate said softly. These aren't insurgents in some foreign desert. This is home territory, and they've had time to prepare. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile as he stepped onto his porch, scanning the horizon with renewed tactical awareness. That's their first mistake, he replied. They think they're hunting an old retired SEAL. They don't realize they've just activated a weapon that was designed for exactly this kind of fight. As Marcus and Shadow moved toward his truck, another explosion rocked the valley. The cartel was putting on a show of force, trying to demonstrate their power. But they had miscalculated. Every fire they set, every property they damaged, only served to cement Marcus's resolve. This wasn't just about protecting his ranch anymore. It was about defending his community, his neighbors, the peaceful life they'd all built here. Starting the truck's engine, Marcus caught movement in his rearview mirror, another drone tracking his movement. Let them watch, he thought. They wanted to see what a retired SEAL would do when pushed. They were about to learn that some weapons get more dangerous with age. Marcus drove toward the Henderson ranch with calculated speed, his mind already shifting into combat operational mode. As columns of smoke rose from scattered points across the valley, he activated the military-grade GPS unit hidden under his dashboard, a piece of equipment left over from his SEAL days that would detect any tracking devices on his vehicle. The drive gave him time to process the situation tactically. The cartel's show of force wasn't random. They were executing a carefully planned psychological operation. Each fire was positioned to be visible from his property, creating a ring of destruction that centered on his ranch. They weren't just sending a message, they were establishing a perimeter. Pulling up to the Henderson place, Marcus quickly assessed the damage. The barn was engulfed in flames, but the fire had been set with precision, designed to destroy property without threatening the main house. Sarah Henderson stood in her front yard, clutching her 2 children, while a pair of cartel soldiers, poorly disguised as local firefighters, helped contain the blaze. Marcus parked within sight of the house but kept his engine running. Shadow remained in the truck, watching silently as his master approached the scene. "Sarah," Marcus called out, noting how the fake firefighters tensed at his arrival. "You and the kids okay?" Sarah nodded, her face pale but composed. "They said it was an electrical fire," she replied, her voice carrying a slight tremor that told Marcus she knew better. "These men showed up so quickly to help." "Too quickly," Marcus agreed, making eye contact with the cartel soldiers. They held his gaze for a moment before looking away, their hands nervously adjusting their firefighting gear. "Sarah, why don't you and the kids come up to my place until Tom gets back? I've got some spare rooms." The cartel soldiers shifted, uncomfortably, but didn't intervene. They couldn't break character without revealing their true purpose. Marcus helped Sarah gather some essentials and get the kids in her car, all while maintaining awareness of his surroundings. 3 more cartel vehicles had parked at discreet distances, watching the scene unfold. Once Sarah and her children were safely on their way to his ranch, Marcus drove home by an alternate route, using old logging paths to avoid potential ambush points. His mind was already formulating a defensive strategy. The cartel had shown their hand. They were willing to use his neighbors as leverage. That meant he needed to prepare not just for his own defense, but for the protection of the entire valley. Back at his ranch, Marcus wasted no time. He headed straight for his basement, unlocking a reinforced door that concealed his armory. The room behind it wasn't just a gun safe. It was a fully equipped tactical operations center. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from cameras hidden across his property, while racks of weapons and equipment lined the walls. "Time to wake up, old friends," Marcus muttered, accessing a hidden panel that revealed his most specialized equipment. His old tactical gear was still in perfect condition, maintained with the same discipline that had kept him alive through countless missions. He began laying out what he'd need: body armor, night vision equipment, communications gear, and weapons, selected for specific purposes. Shadow watched as Marcus methodically prepared his equipment, the dog's training allowing him to remain perfectly still while his master worked. Years of experience had taught Marcus to plan for extended operations. He began organizing supplies into caches that could be hidden at strategic points around his property: ammunition, medical supplies, food, and water. Moving to his communications center, Marcus activated a series of buried sensors around his property, another retirement project that was about to prove its worth. The sensors would detect any movement larger than a coyote, giving him early warning of approaches from any direction. He also launched his own counter-surveillance drones, programmed to operate on frequencies that would be harder for the cartel to detect or jam. A quick check of his security cameras showed Sarah and her kids arriving safely. Marcus let them in through a side entrance, leading them to a fortified safe room he'd built off the main living area. "You'll be safe here," he assured them, showing Sarah the room's features: independent ventilation, emergency supplies, and a hidden escape tunnel that led to a concealed exit on his property. Returning to his tactical room, Marcus spread out detailed topographical maps of the valley. He began marking key positions, likely cartel observation posts, potential staging areas, and defensive positions he could use to his advantage. The old mining road was indeed crucial. It provided the only viable route through the mountains that could handle heavy vehicle traffic. No wonder the cartel wanted it so badly. Marcus's satellite phone buzzed. A message from Kate. The state police were maintaining a visible presence in town, just as planned. The cartel would be watching them, perhaps even expecting a major law enforcement response. That's exactly what Marcus didn't want. A direct confrontation would put too many civilians at risk. Looking at his watch, Marcus noted that 18 hours remained in the cartel's deadline. They would be expecting him to either cave to their demands or attempt to flee. Instead, he would use this time to prepare a response they wouldn't expect. The cartel was used to dealing with frightened civilians or straightforward law enforcement. They weren't prepared for someone who understood asymmetric warfare, someone who had spent decades learning how to counter exactly the kind of operation they were running. Marcus began pulling specific items from his arsenal, tools for a more subtle kind of warfare: date cord, remote detonators, IR markers, and other equipment that would let him control the battlefield on his terms. The cartel had brought the war to his front door, but they were about to learn a harsh lesson. They weren't the hunters here, they were the hunted. And Marcus was prepared to show them exactly why he'd earned the nickname Ghost during his years with the SEALs. As dusk approached, Marcus activated his secure satellite communications system, a piece of equipment few knew he possessed. He'd, maintained certain connections after retirement, keeping contact with the men he'd trusted his life to countless times. Now, it was time to call in the favors he'd hoped never to need. First on his list was Mike Raptor Rodriguez, his former second-in-command. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Ghost. Been a while, brother. This isn't a social call, is it?" "Afraid not, Raptor," Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the security monitors showing cartel vehicles patrolling the distant roads. "Remember that conversation we had about retirement properties? Seems I've got some unwanted developers interested in mine." There was a pause on the line as Mike processed the underlying message. "Cartel?" he asked, his voice dropping to a professional tone Marcus knew well. "El Coyote's crew. They're making their play for the valley. Already started hitting civilian targets." Marcus detailed the situation quickly, using the shorthand they developed over years of operations. "Give me 6 hours," Mike responded without hesitation. "I'm bringing Carter and Jackson. They're both in Colorado right now, working private security. We can be there by midnight." Marcus felt a familiar sense of relief. Carter Doc Wilson had been their team medic, while Thomas Shield Jackson was their demolitions expert. Both had skills that would prove invaluable in the coming fight. His next call was to Sarah Ghost Eye Chen, their former intelligence specialist. She answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, surprising him. "I've been monitoring cartel movements in your region. El Coyote's been pushing north, establishing new routes. Your valley's the missing piece in their network." "How fast can you get here?" Marcus asked, knowing Sarah's ability to gather and analyze intelligence would be crucial. "Already on my way," she replied. "Got some interesting satellite data you'll want to see. Plus some new tech the cartels haven't encountered yet. 2 hours out." Marcus made 3 more calls, each to former team members who'd specialized in different aspects of combat operations. James Shadow Walker Martinez, their infiltration expert. Kevin Tech O'Brien, communications and cyber warfare specialist. And finally, Lisa Angel Ramirez, their former air support coordinator who now ran a private aviation company. Within an hour, his tactical operations center had been transformed into a command post. Sarah arrived first, immediately setting up her equipment and patching into various surveillance networks. Her screen showed cartel movements across 3 states, revealing the larger pattern behind their push into the valley. "They're desperate," Sarah explained, pointing to various data points. "DEA pressure has shut down their traditional routes. They need this valley corridor. That's why they're moving so aggressively." Mike, Carter, and Jackson arrived next, their unmarked SUV pulling up to the ranch through the back trail Marcus had prepared. Shadow greeted them with quiet recognition. He'd trained with these men before. "Place looks exactly like I imagined," Mike commented, surveying the tactical setup. "Trust you to turn a ranch into a fortress without anyone noticing." The others arrived in stages, each bringing specialized equipment and expertise. Kevin immediately began setting up counter-surveillance measures, while Lisa coordinated with her network of pilots to establish potential air support options. As his team assembled in the command center, Marcus felt the familiar rhythm of pre-mission planning take hold. These weren't just former teammates. They were family, bonded by years of shared combat experience and absolute trust in each other's abilities. "Here's what we know," Marcus began, standing before the tactical display. "El Coyote's crew has about 50 operators in the valley, split between 3 main groups. They're well-equipped, ex-military for the most part, but they're used to intimidating civilians, not facing organized resistance." Sarah pulled up thermal imaging from her drone feeds. "They've established observation posts here, and here," she indicated. "Main force is camped 10 miles south, using an abandoned lumber mill as their staging area." "Their timeline?" Mike asked, studying the displays. "They gave me 24 hours to accept their offer," Marcus replied. "That was 12 hours ago. When I refuse, they'll hit hard and fast. They'll want to make an example, show what happens to those who resist." The team absorbed this information, their minds already working on counter-strategies. This wasn't their first time facing cartel operations, but the stakes were different. This wasn't some foreign battlefield. This was home. "We've got one advantage," Marcus continued. "They think they're dealing with a single retired SEAL. They're not expecting a full team response. We can use that assumption against them." For the next hour, they developed their strategy, each member contributing their expertise. Kevin set up a comprehensive communications network, while Jackson began planning tactical demolitions to control enemy movement. Carter established a medical station, and Lisa coordinated with trusted pilots for potential aerial surveillance. As midnight approached, Marcus stood before his assembled team. These were men and women he'd trusted with his life countless times, who'd fought alongside him in some of the world's deadliest places. Now they were together again, preparing to defend not just a piece of land, but a way of life. "Get some rest," Marcus ordered. "Tomorrow we show El Coyote why you don't threaten a SEAL's home, and you definitely don't threaten their family." The first rays of dawn were just beginning to pierce the mountain mist when Marcus's surveillance system detected movement. Sarah's enhanced thermal imaging showed multiple vehicles approaching from 3 different directions, a coordinated advance that spoke of professional military training. "They're not waiting for the deadline," Mike observed from his position in the command center. "Classic cartel tactic, strike when they think we're sleeping." Marcus nodded, watching the feeds with calculated interest. 3 teams, 12 men each. They're keeping their main force in reserve. He keyed his radio, speaking to his position teammates. "All stations, maintain silence. Let them come to us." The cartel forces moved with practiced precision, their vehicles stopping just outside Marcus's perimeter. Through the cameras, they watched as Diego Vasquez emerged from the lead vehicle, directing his men with hand signals. The cartel soldiers spread out in a standard search and clear formation, clearly expecting to find a single sleeping target. "Ghost Eye, status?" Marcus whispered into his comm. "Drones show no additional forces within 5 miles, Sarah responded, from her station. They're confident this is enough manpower for a simple intimidation mission." The first team approached the main house, while the others moved toward the barn and the old workshop. Marcus had anticipated this exact approach. He'd spent years designing his property's defenses, though he'd never imagined he'd be using them against a cartel hit squad. "Execute Phase 1, Marcus ordered quietly. Kevin, monitoring the electronic warfare suite, pressed a series of commands. Immediately, the cartel's radio communications went dead, replaced by static. Simultaneously, their cell phones lost signal. A communications blackout that would force them to rely on visual contact only. The cartel soldiers hesitated, their formation becoming slightly ragged as they lost contact with their command. Diego's voice carried across the morning air as he shouted new orders in Spanish, redirecting his men to close formation. Phase 2, Marcus commanded. Jackson, positioned in a concealed bunker near the property's edge, triggered the first set of charges. They weren't designed to kill, just yet. Instead, carefully placed explosives detonated in sequence, creating a pattern of noise and smoke that fragmented the cartel's formation. The professional soldiers instinctively sought cover, but Marcus had already predicted where they would go. "They're splitting up exactly as planned," Mike reported, watching the thermal signatures scatter. "Moving into the kill zones." Marcus gave them 30 seconds, long enough for the cartel soldiers to think they'd found safe positions. Then he keyed his radio again. "Ghost Eye, light them up." Sarah activated the array of powerful floodlights hidden around the property. The sudden illumination, combined with the lingering smoke, created a disorienting effect that Marcus's team was prepared for. Through their night vision equipment, they watched the cartel soldiers struggle to adjust. "Weapons free," Marcus ordered. "Non-lethal where possible. Make them understand what they're dealing with." The response was immediate and devastating. James, using his infiltration skills, had positioned himself perfectly to take down 3 cartel soldiers with precision shots to their legs and arms. Lisa, coordinating from above in a small observation plane, called out enemy movements with deadly accuracy. Diego's voice rang out again, trying to rally his men, but the confusion was total. Every time his soldiers tried to regroup, they found their planned routes blocked by pre-sighted fire or unexpected obstacles. Marcus had turned his entire property into a combat scenario that favored his team's expertise. "They're pulling back to the vehicles," Sarah reported, her drone feeds showing the tactical retreat. "Wait, new contact. Large SUV approaching fast, from the south." Marcus switched his attention to the new threat. The vehicle was moving with purpose, its driver clearly familiar with combat driving techniques. That's their backup, he realized. Elite team, probably their best operators. The SUV skidded to a stop and 4 men emerged, their movements sharper, more disciplined than the first wave. Their leader, a massive man with tactical gear that spoke of serious combat experience, began barking orders that immediately started bringing organization back to the scattered cartel forces. "That's Xavier El Lobo Rodriguez," Sarah identified, her intelligence database pulling up his profile. Ex-Mexican Special Forces, suspected in multiple high-level cartel operations. He's El Coyote's chief enforcer. Marcus watched as Xavier quickly assessed the situation, reorganizing the remaining cartel soldiers into a more defensive formation. This was no longer about intimidation. It was becoming a serious tactical engagement. "All teams, fall back. To secondary positions," Marcus ordered. "They're about to change their approach." He was right. Under Xavier's direction, the cartel forces began a more methodical advance, using proper cover and movement techniques. They'd learned from their first mistake and weren't going to underestimate their opponent again. "Should we take them now?" Mike asked, his sniper rifle trained on Xavier's position. "Not yet," Marcus replied, watching the tactical display. "Let them think they're adapting. This is just the first round. We need them to report back that they're dealing with more than just one retired SEAL. Let them call in their real forces." The cartel team continued their cautious advance, but Marcus could see the uncertainty in their movements. They'd come expecting an easy operation against a single target. Instead, they'd encountered professional resistance that had anticipated their every move. As the sun fully rose over the mountain valley, both sides knew this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Xavier's team eventually withdrew, carrying their wounded, but Marcus noted the calculating look in the enforcer's eyes as he surveyed the property one last time. The message had been sent. This wouldn't be an easy victory for the cartel, but the real battle was still to come. The command center buzzed with activity as Marcus's team analyzed the aftermath of the first engagement. Sarah's monitors displayed multiple cartel vehicles converging on a location 15 miles south, an abandoned warehouse that had become their temporary headquarters. Through high-resolution satellite imagery, they watched as Xavier's team arrived, clearly delivering their report on the morning's failed operation. "They're calling in heavy reinforcements," Sarah reported, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she intercepted fragmented communications. 3 convoys moving north from their staging areas in Mexico. Heavy weapons, professional operators. "This is a major escalation." Marcus studied the data streams, his expression grim. El Coyote wasn't just sending more men, he was committing serious resources to the operation. The satellite feeds showed armored SUVs, tactical vehicles, and enough firepower to wage a small war. "They've figured out they're not dealing with a standard resistance," Mike observed, cleaning his rifle while watching the feeds. "That first wave was meant to be a show of force. Now they're preparing for a real fight." Kevin's electronic warfare system pinged with intercepted communications. "They're bringing in military-grade equipment," he reported. "Signal jammers, drone platforms, thermal imaging systems. They're going to try to match our technological advantage." Marcus moved to the tactical map, updating unit positions and likely approach routes. The cartel's response was actually following a pattern he'd seen before during his active duty days. When faced with unexpected resistance, they'd typically respond with overwhelming force. "How long until their main force arrives?" he asked Sarah. "Based on convoy movements, 18 hours at most. I count at least 40 vehicles, probably 150-200 operators. They're not taking any chances this time." Lisa entered the command center, fresh from her aerial reconnaissance. "They've got forward observers set up on all the major ridgelines," she reported. "Professional spotters with military-grade equipment. They're mapping every inch of the valley." Marcus nodded, processing the information. The cartel was establishing a proper military operation, treating his ranch like a battlefield that needed to be secured. In many ways, this made their next moves more predictable. They'd follow standard tactical doctrine. "They'll try to isolate us first," he explained, pointing to key positions on the map. "Cut off road access, jam communications, establish a proper cordon. Then they'll probe our defenses again, but with proper reconnaissance this time." James, who had been monitoring local police bands, looked up from his station. "Sheriff Martinez reports they're already setting up checkpoints on all major roads into the valley. They're posing as private security contractors conducting environmental surveys." The team absorbed this information, each member analyzing it through the lens of their expertise. This wasn't just about Marcus's ranch anymore. The cartel was attempting to establish control over the entire valley. "El Coyote himself is coming," Sarah announced suddenly, her eyes fixed on a new data stream. "Private jet just filed a flight plan from Mexico City to a private airstrip 60 miles south. He's bringing his personal security detail, ex-Israeli. Special forces, very well equipped." Marcus moved to the weapons locker, beginning to select additional equipment they'd need for the expanded operation. "They're going to try to overwhelm us with superior numbers and firepower," he stated, checking ammunition stores. "Classic cartel escalation. If intimidation fails, they move straight to overwhelming force." Carter, who had been inventorying their medical supplies, looked up with concern. "We don't have enough resources for a prolonged engagement against those numbers," he warned. "Even with our experience, they could wear us down through attrition." "We're not going to let it become a siege," Marcus replied, his mind already formulating counter-strategies. "They expect us to dig in and try to hold out. Instead, we're going to take the fight to them." He moved to the central tactical display, beginning to outline his plan. "They think they've got us surrounded, but that's their weakness. They're spreading their forces thin, trying to control too much territory. We can use that against them." The team gathered around as Marcus detailed his strategy. Years of combat experience had taught them to trust his instincts, especially when the odds seemed overwhelming. "Doc, coordinate with local medical services. Quietly. We need to be ready for civilian casualties if this escalates further," Marcus ordered. Lisa, I need eyes in the sky around the clock. They'll try to blind us, don't let them. Kevin, prepare mobile communications packages. When they try to cut us off, we need to stay coordinated. Sarah's system pinged again with new intelligence. First convoy just crossed the state line, she reported. Heavy weapons, including vehicle-mounted 50 cals. They're not playing around anymore. Marcus checked his watch, calculating timelines. The cartel was moving faster than expected, clearly rattled by their initial failure. El Coyote was committing major resources to this operation. His reputation was now on the line. They're going to try to make an example of us, Marcus concluded. This isn't just about the ranch anymore. They need to prove that no one can resist them, or their whole operation in the region could be compromised. The team continued their preparations as the sun climbed higher, each member knowing that the relative calm wouldn't last long. The cartel was coming in force, bringing everything they had, but they were about to learn that sometimes the harder you hit, the harder the target hits back. As the cartel's main force approached, Marcus gathered his team in the command center. For final tactical planning, the satellite imagery displayed on the main screen showed the enemy convoy's progress. A snaking line of vehicles moving with military precision through the mountain passes. They'll be here by dawn, Marcus began, standing before the tactical map. El Coyote's flying in personally to oversee the operation. That tells us two things. First, this has become about more than just securing a smuggling route. Second, they're going to hit us with everything they've got. Sarah pulled up detailed thermal scans of the approaching forces. I count 36 vehicles in the main convoy, heavy weapons mounted on at least 8 of them. They've also got 4 mobile command units, probably electronic warfare and communications. Their first priority will be to establish a perimeter, Mike added, pointing to key positions on the map. They'll want to control all access points to the valley. Based on their movement patterns, they'll set up their command post here. He indicated a plateau that offered both cover and clear lines of sight to the ranch. Marcus nodded, having anticipated this. That's exactly what we want them to do. Kevin, how are the preparations coming? Kevin looked up from his array of electronic equipment. Ready to go. I've set up our ghost network. When they try to jam our communications, they'll hit decoy signals while our real network stays hidden. We can let them think they've blinded us. Jackson, talk me through the demolition setup, Marcus requested, moving to another section of the map. The demolitions expert highlighted several key points on the display. We've rigged the old mining tunnels with remote charges. Not to collapse them, just enough to control movement through them. The main road has pressure-triggered devices every 100 yards, all on separate detonators. We can isolate any section we want. Lisa entered the command center, fresh from coordinating with her pilot network. I've got 3 aircraft on standby, all equipped with thermal imaging. They'll maintain altitude and stay out of radar range. The cartel won't know we have eyes in the sky. Marcus processed all this information, his mind assembling the pieces of their counter-strategy. James, what's the status on our surprise package? James smiled slightly, pulling up schematics on a side screen. Ready and waiting. They'll never see it coming. I've set up false equipment signatures that'll draw their attention exactly where we want it. The team spent the next hour refining their plans, each member contributing their expertise to create a comprehensive defense strategy. But Marcus knew they needed more than just good planning. They needed to think like their enemy. El Coyotes. Not just sending soldiers, he explained, bringing up intelligence photos of their opponent. He's sending a message. Every cartel leader in North America will be watching how this plays out. If a small team can successfully resist them here, it threatens their entire operation. So they can't just win, Mike concluded. They have to win big, make an example. Exactly, Marcus confirmed, which means they'll be aggressive, maybe even reckless. We can use that. Carter, how are we set for medical support? The medic gestured to his expanded aid station. Ready for anything. I've got backup supplies cached at 3 locations, plus emergency evacuation routes planned for any civilians who might get caught in the crossfire. Sarah's system suddenly pinged with new information. Update on El Coyote's arrival. His jet just landed. He's traveling with a 12-man security detail. All ex-military, top-tier operators. They're headed for the command post location. Now. Marcus moved to the weapons locker, beginning final equipment checks. Everyone know their positions and assignments? The team nodded. They'd drilled these plans repeatedly over the last hours. Remember, Marcus continued, they're expecting us to fight defensively, to try to hold out until help arrives. That's not our play. We're going to let them think they've got us surrounded, let them get comfortable with their superior numbers. Then we show them what a real SEAL team can do. Kevin's electronic warfare system detected new signals. They're starting to set up their comm network. Want me to begin interference? Not yet, Marcus replied. Let them establish their full network first. We want them relying on it completely before we start playing with their heads. The team continued, their preparations as the sun began to set. Each member knew their role in the complex strategy they developed. It wasn't just about defending the ranch anymore. They were preparing to take the fight directly to one of the most powerful cartels in North America. One last thing, Marcus added, gathering his team's attention. El Coyote's men are professionals. They're well-trained and well-equipped, but they're fighting for money. We're fighting for something more important. We're fighting for home. Don't forget that. As darkness fell over the valley, the team moved to their initial positions. The cartel's forces were closing in, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. But they were about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between having more soldiers and having better ones. Marcus checked his weapon one final time, shadow alert at his side. Let them come, he said quietly. We're ready. The pre-dawn darkness was shattered by the sound of engines as the cartel's main force began their advance. Through night vision optics, Marcus watched their vehicles move into position, a choreographed display of military precision that spoke of extensive planning. El Coyote's forces were taking no chances this time. Ghost Eye, status report, Marcus whispered into his comm. Main force splitting into 3 elements, Sarah responded from her monitoring station. Alpha Group moving to establish blocking positions along the North Ridge. Bravo and Charlie groups forming a pincer movement toward the ranch. El Coyote's personal security detail is maintaining position at their command post. Marcus observed the cartel's deployment through his thermal scope. Their strategy was textbook: establish superior positions, cut off potential escape routes, then begin a systematic advance. Under different circumstances, he might have admired their professionalism. All stations maintain Protocol 0, he ordered quietly. Let them think they've got us pinned down. The cartel forces moved with increasing confidence, their vehicles taking up strategic positions around the property. Heavy weapons teams began setting up their equipment. 50 caliber machine guns, mortars, and what looked like Russian-made anti-tank weapons. They're not taking any chances, Mike commented over the comm. Those AT weapons could turn this place into rubble. They're not here to destroy the property, Marcus replied. They need it intact for their smuggling operation. The heavy weapons are just for show, psychological warfare. Dawn was breaking when El Coyote finally made his move. A black Mercedes SUV pulled up to the command post, and a man stepped out. Tall, well-dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to absolute authority. 4 bodyguards flanked him immediately, their movement speaking of Israeli Special Forces training. Target confirmed, Sarah reported. That's Miguel El Coyote Ramirez himself. First time he's ever personally overseen an operation this far north. Marcus watched through his scope as El Coyote surveyed the ranch through expensive binoculars. The cartel leader's presence changed everything. He wouldn't leave without a decisive victory, one way or another. The first shots came at exactly 600, precise single rounds fired at the ranch house windows, not trying to kill, just demonstrating their ability to hit targets at will. Marcus had expected this. It was another psychological tactic, meant to emphasize their helplessness against superior forces. They're starting their comm jamming, Kevin reported. All civilian frequencies are dead. They think they've cut us off completely. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Time to implement Phase 1. Ghost Eye, you're up. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, activating their countermeasures. Suddenly, the cartel's communication network was flooded. with phantom signatures, false signals that suggested a much larger defending force was present. The effect was immediate. The cartel's disciplined advance faltered as unit commanders began reporting contact with enemies that weren't there. Through his scope, Marcus could see El Coyote gesturing angrily at his communications officers, demanding explanations. Phase 2, Marcus ordered. Shadow Walker, light them up. James, who had spent hours preparing the battlefield, triggered his array of specialized devices. Powerful LED strips hidden in the trees activated sequentially, creating the illusion of muzzle flashes from multiple positions. Combined with pre-recorded gunfire sounds played through hidden speakers, it created a convincing illusion of a large force engaging the cartel from multiple directions. The cartel soldiers responded predictably, opening fire on the phantom threats. The sound of automatic weapons filled the valley as they wasted ammunition shooting at shadows and echoes. They're clustering exactly where we want them, Mike reported, from his sniper position. Moving into our pre-sighted zones. Marcus watched El Coyote's reaction through his scope. The cartel leader had quickly realized something was wrong, but by then it was too late. His forces had already fallen for the deception, breaking their careful formation to respond to imaginary threats. Execute Phase 3, Marcus commanded. All stations weapons free. Make every shot count. The real shooting began with surgical precision. Mike's sniper rifle cracked twice, disabling the two closest heavy weapons positions. James and his infiltration team emerged from hidden positions, engaging the confused cartel forces with devastating accuracy. Lisa's overhead surveillance coordinated their fire, ensuring maximum effect with minimum ammunition expenditure. The cartel forces tried to regroup, but Marcus's team had prepared the battlefield too well. Every time they attempted to form a coherent defense, they faced fire from unexpected directions. Their superior numbers meant nothing against an invisible enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. El Coyote's voice carried across the battlefield, shouting orders in Spanish as he tried to regain control of the situation. His professional soldiers were fighting well, but they were fighting blind, unable to effectively target their hidden opponents while being picked apart by precise fire. They're pulling back to secondary positions, Sarah reported, monitoring the thermal signatures, regrouping around their command post. Wait, new development. Large heat signatures approaching from the south. They're bringing in their reserve force. Marcus had expected this. El Coyote wasn't a man who accepted defeat easily. The morning's engagement was just the beginning. The cartel leader would commit everything he had to win this fight. All stations hold positions, Marcus ordered. This was just their opening move. The real battle is about to begin. He watched as more cartel vehicles appeared on the horizon. The first clash had gone their way, but El Coyote was far from defeated. The question now was whether their carefully laid plans could withstand the full fury of a cartel army determined to save its leader's reputation. The situation escalated rapidly as El Coyote's reserve forces entered the valley. Through his tactical scope, Marcus counted at least 20 more vehicles, heavily armed trucks carrying elite cartel soldiers. These weren't the standard operators they'd faced earlier. Their movements and equipment suggested specialized training, possibly former special forces from various military backgrounds. Ghost Eye, what's the situation? Marcus radioed, watching the new forces deploy with professional efficiency. Not good, Sarah replied, her voice tense. They're bringing in some serious hardware. I'm seeing vehicle-mounted anti-aircraft, guns, military-grade jamming equipment, and what looks like Russian thermal imaging systems. They're adapting to our tactics. The morning sun now fully illuminated the battlefield, revealing the extent of their challenge. El Coyote had positioned his forces in a complete circle around the ranch, each unit supporting the others with overlapping fields of fire. The cartel leader hadn't survived this long by being predictable. He was learning from his earlier mistakes. Multiple drones launching from their command post, Kevin reported, his electronic warfare systems lighting up with new signals. These aren't commercial models. They're military-grade surveillance platforms. Our electromagnetic concealment won't fool them for long. Marcus watched as the drones spread out across the valley, their sophisticated cameras searching for his team's hidden positions. The technological advantage they'd relied on was rapidly eroding. Contact, Mike's voice cracked over the comm. They're using the drones to direct precision fire. I've got to move positions. The sharp crack of a .50 caliber round emphasized his words, the bullet striking exactly where Mike had been moments before. The cartel's new strategy became clear as their forces began a coordinated advance. Under the guidance of their drone network, they systematically began eliminating potential hiding spots, using their superior firepower to force Marcus's team into an increasingly smaller area. They're not just trying to win anymore, James observed from his concealed position. They're trying to make sure we have nowhere left to hide. El Coyote's reputation is on the line. He needs to prove that resistance is futile. Marcus felt the pressure mounting as more of their carefully prepared positions were compromised. The cartel forces were no longer falling for their deception tactics, instead using their numbers and firepower to brute force their way through the team's defenses. Carter, status on our supplies? Marcus asked, knowing they were burning through ammunition faster than planned. We're down to 60% on primary ammunition stores, the medic reported. Medical supplies still good, but we've got wounded civilians in the safe room needing evacuation soon. The Henderson kids are getting scared. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. El Coyote had committed his full strength to the assault, and the weight of his forces was beginning to tell. Even with their experience and preparation, Marcus's team couldn't be everywhere at once. They're breaching the outer perimeter, Sarah announced, her voice tight with concern. 3 teams moving up the east slope using smoke for cover. Thermal signatures show they're carrying shaped charges. They're going to try to breach the ranch house. A massive explosion rocked the valley as the cartel forces detonated their first set of charges, creating a gap in the ranch's defensive line. Almost immediately, elite soldiers began pouring through the breach, moving with the kind of coordination that only comes from extensive combat experience. Fall back to secondary positions, Marcus ordered, knowing they were reaching a critical point. Protocol Delta is now in effect. His team acknowledged the order, recognizing the gravity of the situation. Protocol Delta was their last resort defense plan, one they'd hoped not to need. It meant they were now fighting for survival, rather than victory. Marcus, Kate's voice suddenly came over their emergency channel. State Police SWAT is mobilizing, but they're at least an hour out. The cartel has blockaded all major roads into the valley. Another explosion rocked the ranch house as the cartel forces pressed their advantage. Through the smoke and chaos, Marcus could see El Coyote directing the assault personally now, his confidence growing with each passing minute. They're inside the outer buildings, James reported, the sound of intense gunfire nearly drowning out his words. We can't hold this position much longer. The crisis point had arrived. Everything they'd planned for, every contingency they'd prepared, was being systematically stripped away by the cartel's overwhelming force. Marcus knew the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of his ranch, but the lives of everyone involved. All stations fall back to the house, he commanded, his voice steady despite the dire situation. Initiate Protocol Omega. Repeat, Protocol Omega is now in effect. His team acknowledged the order with grim determination. Protocol Omega was their absolute last resort, a plan so risky they'd hoped never to use it. But with the cartel forces closing in from all sides, their options were running out. As Marcus watched El Coyote's men advance through the smoke, he knew they had reached the moment of truth. Everything would depend on what happened in the next few minutes. The question was no longer whether they could win. It was whether they could survive long enough to execute their final, desperate gambit. Protocol Omega wasn't just a defensive measure. It was Marcus's masterpiece of tactical planning, born from decades of combat experience. As the cartel forces closed in on the ranch house, believing they had their prey cornered, they didn't realize they were walking into the most elaborate trap of all. Ghost Eye, initiate sequence Alpha through Delta, Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the steel edge of absolute certainty. Execute on my mark. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, activating a series of pre-programmed protocols. Throughout the valley, hidden systems began powering up, equipment that had been carefully positioned over the past 5 years, disguised as ordinary ranch infrastructure. They're consolidating their forces for the final push, Mike reported, from his fallback position. El Coyote's bringing up his elite teams. They think they've got us. Marcus watched through his tactical display as the cartel forces moved exactly where he'd predicted they would. Military doctrine dictated concentrating forces for a decisive breakthrough, and that's precisely what he was counting on. All stations report ready, Sarah confirmed. Waiting on your command. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that timing would be everything. Execute Protocol Omega. Now. The first phase activated instantly. Every power line in the valley suddenly surged with electromagnetic pulses, carefully calibrated to disable electronic equipment without causing permanent damage. The cartel's drone network dropped from the sky, their communication systems went dark, and their sophisticated targeting systems became useless. EMP successful, Kevin reported. Their tech is blind, moving to Phase 2. Before the cartel forces could recover from their sudden technological blackout, the second phase began. Hidden speakers throughout the valley activated simultaneously, broadcasting a carefully designed combination of low-frequency sounds and echo effects. The disorienting audio, combined with the morning mist, created an environmental weapon that Marcus had adapted from his SEAL training. "They're losing cohesion," James observed through his scope. "The sound is breaking up their formations." But this was just the beginning. As the cartel soldiers struggled to maintain their positions, Marcus initiated the third phase. The irrigation systems he'd modified over the years suddenly activated, but instead of water, they sprayed a dense fog of non-toxic, but disorienting, chemicals. The same compounds used in advanced military training exercises. "Chemical dispersal complete," Carter confirmed. "Non-lethal irritants are having the desired effect." Through his thermal scope, Marcus watched as the carefully orchestrated chaos unfolded. The cartel's superior numbers had become a liability. Their troops were bumping into each other, struggling to maintain formation in the artificial fog, while the disorienting sounds made communication impossible. "Now for the knockout punch," Marcus ordered. "Execute final phase." This was the moment everything had been building toward. Jake triggered the last set of charges, not explosives, but specialized devices that released a powerful electromagnetic surge, completely frying any remaining electronics the cartel forces were using. Simultaneously, Sarah activated their hidden counter-surveillance network, flooding the valley with false thermal signatures that made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe. El Coyote's voice could be heard shouting orders in Spanish, trying to regain control of his disintegrating force. But his professional soldiers, trained to rely on technology and communication, were now fighting blind and deaf in a battlefield that seemed to have come alive against them. "Move to contact," Marcus commanded his team. "Execute with precision." His team emerged from their defensive positions with practiced efficiency. Each member knew exactly where to move and who to target. While the cartel forces were still struggling, with the effects of Protocol Omega, Marcus's team began systematically neutralizing key targets, weapon emplacements, command vehicles, and communication nodes. El Coyote's security detail is breaking formation, Sarah reported, tracking thermal signatures through the chaos. "They're pulling back to the command post." Marcus focused his attention on the cartel leader's position. Through the artificial fog and confusion, he could see El Coyote's elite guards trying to establish a defensive perimeter around their boss. But without their technology and communications, they were fighting at a severe disadvantage. "Time to end this," Marcus declared. "All teams, converge on the command post, standard breakthrough formation." His team acknowledged and began moving with coordinated precision. While the bulk of the cartel forces were still scattered and disoriented, Marcus led the advance toward El Coyote's position. Years of training and combat experience had prepared them for exactly this kind of operation. The tide had turned. What had seemed like a desperate last stand had transformed into a decisive counterattack. El Coyote's overwhelming force advantage had been neutralized by superior tactics and preparation. The cartel leader was about to learn why Marcus had earned his reputation as one of the most effective tactical commanders in SEAL history. "Remember," Marcus transmitted to his team as they closed in on their target, "we're not just fighting for the ranch anymore. We're fighting to send a message that will be heard in every cartel boardroom from here to Mexico City. Today, we show them why you don't underestimate retired warriors. Through the artificial fog and chaos, Marcus led his team toward El Coyote's command post with ruthless efficiency. The cartel leader's elite guards, despite their training, were struggling to adapt to the complete technological blackout and environmental disorientation that Protocol Omega had created. "Ghost Eye, give me a sit-rep on the target," Marcus commanded, moving through the battlefield like a phantom. "El Coyote's trapped at his command post," Sarah reported. "His vehicle's electronics are fried, and his security detail is down to 8 operators. They're setting up a defensive perimeter, but they're operating blind without their tech." Marcus signaled to his team, and they moved into their final assault positions. Mike's sniper fire had already eliminated the cartel's heavy weapons positions, while James and his infiltration team had systematically disabled their vehicles. El Coyote's force, which had seemed overwhelming just hours ago, was now scattered and ineffective. "Remember, we take him alive," Marcus reminded his team. "The message has to be clear. This isn't about revenge, it's about consequences." The first phase of their final assault began with precision shots from Mike's position, forcing El Coyote's remaining guards to cluster tighter around their leader. It was textbook counter-tactics, using the enemy's protective instincts against them. "They're bunching up exactly as predicted," Mike confirmed through his scope. "Ready for Phase 2. Marcus gave the signal, and Kevin activated their last electronic warfare surprise, a focused electromagnetic pulse that turned El Coyote's command post into a dead zone. Even backup radios and emergency systems went dark. "Now!" Marcus commanded, and his team moved with synchronized precision. James and his infiltration team struck from the east, using the confusion to eliminate 3 of the remaining guards with non-lethal shots. From the west, Lisa coordinated a series of precisely timed flashbangs that further disoriented the cartel's defensive position. El Coyote's voice carried across the battlefield, shouting orders in increasingly desperate Spanish. His remaining guards tried to form a defensive circle, but they were fighting against an enemy they couldn't effectively target or track. Marcus moved through the chaos like the ghost that had earned him his nickname, Shadow, at his side. The German Shepherd's training proved invaluable as he detected and alerted to hidden guards, allowing Marcus to neutralize threats before they could react. "Target is moving," Sarah's voice cracked over the comm. "El Coyote's making a break for the secondary vehicle." But Marcus had anticipated this. With a hand signal to Shadow, both man and dog moved to intercept. El Coyote's desperate dash for escape took him exactly where Marcus had planned, into a carefully prepared trap zone. The cartel leader suddenly found himself caught in the open, his escape route cut off by precisely placed suppressing fire. His remaining guards were pinned down, unable to provide effective coverage. "It's over, Miguel," Marcus called out, using El Coyote's real name. "Your men are down, your tech is dead, and reinforcements aren't coming. Make the smart choice." El Coyote's response was to draw a gold-plated pistol, but before he could aim, Shadow burst from the fog like an avenging spirit. The German Shepherds. Training kicked in perfectly, disarming the cartel leader with practiced efficiency without causing serious injury. Marcus emerged from the chaos, his rifle trained steadily on El Coyote. The cartel leader's expensive suit was now dirty and torn, his carefully maintained appearance shattered along with his aura of invincibility. "You have no idea what you've done," El Coyote snarled, clutching his dog-bitten arm. "The cartel will not forget this. They will send armies." "No, they won't," Marcus replied calmly, "because you're going to send them a message. The same message every cartel leader needs to hear. Some places aren't worth the cost of taking." The remaining cartel forces, seeing their leader captured and their advantage completely neutralized, began surrendering to Marcus's team. Sarah's surveillance showed scattered groups of cartel soldiers either surrendering or fleeing into the mountains. Federal response teams are finally getting through the roadblocks, Kate's voice reported over the emergency channel. "They're securing the outer perimeter now. You've got company coming. Looks like DEA and FBI." Marcus kept his rifle trained on El Coyote as the sound of approaching law enforcement helicopters filled the air. The cartel leader's expression was a mix of rage and disbelief. He had committed his full strength to taking one ranch and had instead suffered a defeat that would become legendary in cartel circles. "You should have done your homework better," Marcus told him quietly. "Should have asked why they called me Ghost. It's not just because I can move unseen. It's because I can turn an entire battlefield into a haunted zone where every shadow becomes a weapon, every sound becomes a threat, and all your advantages become liabilities." The morning sun finally broke through the artificial fog, revealing the full extent of the cartel's defeat. Disabled vehicles littered the battlefield, while disarmed cartel soldiers sat in groups under the watchful eyes of Marcus's team. What had been meant to be a show of force had instead become a demonstration of how superior tactics and preparation could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. "Clear the valley," Marcus ordered his team as the first FBI helicopters appeared. Overhead. "Protocol Omega is complete. Stand down and prepare for federal contact." The ranch had been defended, but more importantly, a message had been sent that would echo through every cartel boardroom from Texas to Colombia. Some targets weren't worth the cost, and some retired warriors were better left undisturbed. Days following the battle saw Marcus's ranch transform from a war zone back into a peaceful homestead, though subtle changes remained. Federal agents swarmed the valley, documenting evidence and processing captured cartel members. El Coyote and his top lieutenants were transported to a high-security facility, facing multiple federal charges that would ensure they spent decades behind bars. Marcus stood on his porch at dawn, just as he had on the morning this all began, watching the sun rise over his property. Shadow sat beside him, ever vigilant despite the return to peace. The physical damage to the ranch was substantial. Bullet holes riddled buildings, explosions had scarred the landscape, and parts of his fence line would need complete replacement. "Quite a mess we've got to clean up," Kate observed, joining him on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She'd been instrumental in coordinating with federal authorities, ensuring the incident was properly documented and legally justified. "Property can be rebuilt," Marcus replied, accepting the coffee. "The important thing is the message we sent. The cartels now know this valley isn't worth the cost of taking." Sarah emerged from the command center, which was being dismantled and returned to its disguised state. "Latest intelligence confirms our success," she reported. "Cartel channels are buzzing with the news. They're calling it the Ghost's Valley now, marking it as territory to avoid." The rest of Marcus's team was preparing to depart, each returning to their civilian lives now that the crisis had passed. Mike approached, his sniper rifle cleaned and packed away. "You know they might try again," he warned. "Different cartel, different approach." Marcus nodded, but there was no concern in his expression. "Let them try. The defenses remain, and now they know what happens when they push too hard. Sometimes the best victory is the one that prevents future battles." James joined them, carrying intelligence reports from his DEA contacts. "The cartel's regional operation is in chaos," he reported. "El Coyote's capture has created a power vacuum. They're too busy fighting among themselves to worry about this valley for now." Lisa's small observation plane made a final pass overhead, waggling its wings in farewell before turning south. Her aerial surveillance had been crucial to their victory, and now she was returning to her private aviation business, though Marcus knew she'd be ready if needed again. "The Henderson family is moving back to their ranch today," Carter reported, finishing his final medical inventory. "No lasting injuries, though those kids might have some interesting stories to tell their grandchildren someday." Marcus surveyed his property, noting how quickly nature was already beginning to reclaim the battlefield. Spring grass was pushing through the scorched earth, and birds had returned to the trees. Life was resilient, especially here in the mountains. "We've got cleanup crews scheduled," Kate informed him, reviewing notes on her phone. "The county's approved emergency funds for rebuilding, though I suspect your insurance company might have some questions about all this." "Let them ask," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "I've got all the documentation they'll need. thanks to Sarah's surveillance records. The team gathered for one final briefing in Marcus's living room, now restored to its pre-battle state. Maps and tactical displays had been replaced by normal furniture, though certain defensive modifications remained discreetly in place. The ranch's security systems have been upgraded, Kevin reported, closing his laptop. New protocols, better camouflage for the defensive positions. Next time, if there is a next time, we'll be even better prepared. Marcus looked at each member of his team, these warriors who had come when called and fought with the same dedication they'd shown in their military days. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the fight, but for reminding everyone that old soldiers don't fade away. We just find new missions." The team began their goodbyes, each knowing they might be called together again someday. Their bond had been forged in combat years ago, and this battle had only strengthened it. They departed one by one, returning to their civilian lives, but remaining forever ready if needed. As the sun climbed higher, Marcus walked his property line with Shadow, checking fence repairs and noting areas that needed attention. The ranch would recover, perhaps stronger than before. The hidden defenses would remain, upgraded and improved. A silent warning to any who might consider following El Coyote's mistake. Kate's patrol car pulled away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his faithful companion. The valley was peaceful again, but it was a peace built on strength and readiness rather than complacency. His father's words came back to him. A warrior's greatest victory isn't in winning battles, but in creating a peace strong enough to prevent them. Inside his house, Marcus opened his father's journal, adding his own entry about recent events. Future generations would know that this land had been defended, that its peace had been earned through courage and sacrifice. The ranch wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance against those who would take by force what they couldn't claim by right. As evening approached, Marcus stood on his porch one final time, watching the sun set over his defended land. Shadow alert at his feet, coffee in hand, he allowed himself to relax truly for the first time in days. The ranch was secure. His friends were safe, and a powerful message had been sent to any who might consider following in El Coyote's footsteps. The Ghost's Valley would remain peaceful, not because it was unprotected, but because it was defended by those who understood that true strength lies not in the battles you fight, but in the ones you prevent.